After almost 2 weeks of insane amount of work hours, I'm finally back to talk about some cards that have been revealed in the past few weeks. So the next coming days, we're gonna wrap everything up very quickly. Also, tomorrow the new product stream will be live, so there's more things to talk about. But before all that, Shojodoji cards, aka Murakumo and Umetama, coming to Standard.
Stand up! Vanguard!
Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another Cardfight update, and as the intro probably already told you, it's a very hectic episode today, as well as a lot of hectic things going on. The reason why I'm very late with the last couple of videos, as well as with these videos that are coming this week, because work has been nuts. But that all aside, let's dive straight into this new ride line for Dragon Empire and these new cards that supports this ride line, so have understanding what this new deck from set 8, Minerva's Rising, is going to bring to the table. So first off, we of course have a new starter for a new ride line, which in this case is Can't Quit Sake Stealth Rogue Shojodoji. And it's just a generic starter, so let's move on. So next up we've got this grade 1, which is Sakura Romance Stealth Rogue Shojodoji. And this Shojodoji has the effect, although when the unit plays on the Vanguard circle, look at the top 5 cards of your deck, choose up to 2 normal units with stealth in their card names from among them, reveal them, put one of the revealed cards into the soul, bind the rest of the revealed cards, and shuffle your deck. So this is a very interesting effect because it allows you to filter your deck for normal stealth units, and we can immediately see what type of mechanic this ride line is going to have, because we put cards into the soul and we put cards into the bind zone. This is all complete setup for follow-up turns. And this card also has an additional effect which immediately shows us some synergy here, which is Act from Bind Zone. If you have a grade 1 or greater Vanguard with stealth, its card name costs Soulless 1, and call this card to the Vanguard circle. So we can immediately see how we can use the initial skill, because we can use the soul to call this thing out to the bind zone. So if we put this thing in the bind zone, we immediately can call it out to flood the board with some aggression. So it's somewhat of a pseudo plus in the first skill, which is interesting, but it can also be used and utilized in different directions once we take a look at the rest of the cards. So let's move on to the grade 2. Here we have World Shaper Stealth Rogue Shojodoji, and this Shojodoji has the effect, although when a unit is placed in the Vanguard circle, look at the top 5 cards of your deck, choose up to 2 normal units with stealth in their card names from among them, reveal them, put one of the revealed cards into your soul, call the rest of the revealed cards to the Vanguard circle, and shuffle your deck. So very similar to the grade 1, but unlike the grade 1 that puts something in the bind zone, we now can call something to the field, so this is a bit more immediate aggression, as you immediately can flood the board, which is nice, as it's you're less reliant on specific calling something or putting something into the bind zone to potentially get units on the board, was we've seen with the grade 1. Or with this grade 2, because this grade 2 also has the same effect as the grade 1, which is Act from Bind Zone. If you have a grade 2 or greater Vanguard with stealth in its card name, cost Soulless 1, and call this card to the Vanguard circle. So now, if we put this grade 2 in the bind zone with the grade 1, then on turn 2, we not only are going to get a card onto the field with this grade 2 effect, but now we can use the grade 2 in the bind zone to also call it. So now you can immediately flood the board on turn 2 for immediate aggression if you go first, because this is the first turn that you can start swinging. So a nice way to amp up pressure very early on, while also setting up your other plays and potentially filling your soul for other soul blasting skills, or certain cards that might interact with your soul. Which brings us to the grade 3 of this ride line, which is Peak Personage Stealth Rogue Shojodoji. And this Shojodoji has the effect, Act from Vanguard circle once a turn, cause bind 2 cards with stealth in their card names from soul, choose 2 of your opponent's rearguard circles, bind all of the cards on the chosen rearguard circles, and your opponents put those cards into their hand at the end of that turn. So this is an effect that's very reminiscent of, I believe, old Murakumo cards that essentially bounce stuff or from the hand or potential field, and then at the end of the turn your opponent can put them back in their hand. So it's like a pseudo control effect, but not necessarily minusing your opponent's resources. But if you go for an aggression turn and a push turn, those cards are now effectively useless because they don't have access to those cards. And this is somewhat similar, but it has a different angle, because this card can, to some extent, circumvent cards with resist abilities because it targets the rearguard circle, and at the same time it can then therefore potentially target multiple cards at the same time. Think of crossover dress and overdress units because everything gets bound. Now, depending on the value, you might not want to do that because you give the overdress / crossover dress player all those cards eventually back in their hand, which might not be too ideal because that can be quite a lot of cards. But there are definitely effects within this archetype that allows you to potentially snipe those cards, but we will get to there in a moment. And yes, binding 2 cards from Soul might sound a bit of a very restrictive condition, but keep in mind, we are putting stealths in our Soul not only with the right line, but also with the right line effect. So it shouldn't be too hard to fulfill this condition. But then we also have the secondary effect, which also plays into this, which is auto from the Vanguard circle. When this unit attacks a Vanguard, cost counter +1 and put 2 rearguards into your Soul, choose a card with stealth in its card name from your bind zone, call to the rearguard circle, and if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, that called unit gets power +10k until the end of turn. So now we see how we can fuel the Soul on multiple turns, but then also this allows us to use the bind zone to have multi-attack options, which is really good because that means we at least have that pressure coming out of our attacks while also applying this field disruption / control effects. And also keep in mind, with the first ability, we put 2 cards from our Soul into the bind zone. If we target the grade 1 and grade 2 of the right line, we can immediately call those cards out, thus being able to also get immediate value of those effects. And because the grade 1 also already put something into the bind zone, we will still have a target left for this Shojodoji to pick for the multi-attack option. So overall, very interesting mechanic that is very centered, focused around the right line effects itself, because it's a self-contained engine that once you've ridden up, you already have basically all the tools you need to do your stuff. You don't need any external factors like we see with other right lines, like for example Nirvana that needs other crossover dress pieces or overdress pieces, or the lyrical right lines that need specific order cards to achieve or very specific rearguards to achieve their game plan. The only thing this right line needs to do their full game plan on their first grade return is basically a couple of generic stealth cards, and that's it. Once you hit those targets, you basically can go off, and potentially you can say you only need 1 in order to get something in the bind zone so you can unleash your full combo. But of course, that isn't everything, because we also see direct support for this right line, which then will showcases a bit more of the power oomph that this deck can potentially dish out. So first up, we got a grade 1 Stealth Fiend, which is Stealth Fiend Komount. And Stealth Fiend Komount has the effect, although when the unit is placed in the rearguard circle from hand, so that's very important, cost counter +1, choose a card from your opponent's bind zone and you may put it on the bottom of their deck. If you did not put a card, choose up to 1 unit card with stealth in its card name and grade less than or equal to your Vanguard from your bind zone and call to the rearguard circle. So this is a card that has 2 different effects and it's useful in multiple scenarios. Being able to flood the board is great, as we've seen that effect in the grade 1 and grade 2 that can recall themselves. This allows you to recall potentially anything, which is great for aggression. But if we combine this with the grade 3's ability to potentially snipe cards from our opponent's side of the field, we can put those cards away so our opponent cannot get access to those cards. And spinning cards back to the deck can be very devastating depending on what you spin against against very specific decks. This is a great way to shut down overdress and crossover dress decks, because you spin back their overdressed units and then you target the trickstars and put those on the bottom of the deck. Yes, they might have all these pieces back in their hand, but it's now just raw shield value, and that's essentially it, because without trickstars, these cards don't really do a lot. And against the normal overdress deck, this is basically a very vital blow against Aspera Idea multi-attackers, because they revolve around having everything in the drop zone so they can stack everything up to have a massive beater. In this case, you now bounce everything back into their hand, so they need to forcefully guard with everything to get it back to set up their next Aspera Idea. But at the same time, if you also snipe away their Trickstar, they might not even be able to do anything with it, which means you just shut down a lot of aggression from the overdressed player. Follow up, we have a brand new grade 2, which is Stealth Dragon Yakumetsu Arcs. And this Arcs has the effect, although when it's placed in the rearguard circle from bind zone, this unit gets power plus 5k until the end of turn. So this is a 15k beater, it's a very generic attack that we've seen so far, and this can combo off of the grade 3, thus becoming potentially a 25k beater beater on the 4th or potentially multi-attack. But then it also has another effect, which is auto rearguard circle. When this unit attacks, costs Soul Blast 1, choose a card from your opponent's bind zone and put it on the bottom of their deck. So again, another way to snipe cards away from our opponent's bind zone. So this combined with the grade 1, we can now potentially remove both the units that we targeted with our grade 3 if they don't have multiple cards on the circles and they just lost those cards. It's of course less effective than just direct retiring, but depending on the scenarios, it can be a great way to get more value over the long course of the game. Now follow, we also have a brand new grade 3, which is Stealth Dragon Unpreceded. And Unpreceded has the effect, auto, when this unit is placed on the rearguard circle by your card's ability, if you have a Vanguard with Tamayura or Shojodoji in its card name, cost Soul Blast 1 and draw a card. So this is interesting because we once again see a card that can synergize with the glitter ride lines as well as the new mechanics. And this one, I can see why it also is Tamayura support, because Tamayura also allows you to call a card from your soul for multi-attack options. Very similar to Shojodoji that allows you to multi-attack with cards by superior calling them, but in this case, it calls it from the bind zone. Basically giving extra draw power to either decks can be really important and can be very useful. Now, will this see play in Tamayura? I don't know. I don't know if it actually has room, especially with the new Rimmery and Rummery, but this probably will be played in Shojodoji because not only is it a very powerful draw engine for Shojodoji, it's also an incredibly powerful beater because it has the effect continues a rearguard circle. If 2 or more of your cards were put from the rearguard circle into your soul this turn, this unit gets power plus 10k. Again, this effect applies to both archetypes because of the way how they work. And this means in Shojodoji, at the bare minimum, it's a 23k beater, but it could be a 33k beater as a multi-attacker that can potentially draw you cards. So depending on what you want to do, you can either go for the grade 2, which is a bit weaker, but it gives you more control options, or you can go into this grade 3, which is just straight up raw beat stick power as well as potential draw power if you need it. So in terms of the units that we have quite an interesting lineup of stealth dragons or stealth units. And overall, we are still, if I'm going to be honest, is still a bit limited in the amount of cards we have. But we do have more stealth cards, but the only ones that are currently out in Overdress that are useful are a couple of grade 1s that either build up soul. But I think in my honest opinion, the only one that's currently the most interesting here is Tensha Stat, Stealth Dragon Tensha Stat, which is the unhit Persona Ride Searcher. That I can see seeing play in this deck just by the sheer fact that it puts a lot of pressure, it's searchable, and can definitely benefit this deck if you rely on this multi-attack pattern and just drawing into more combo pieces. So hopefully we're going to see more stealth units to support this archetype a bit more and to flesh out the playstyle. But on top of that, we also have a order card to take a look at, which got revealed as well, which is this normal order card, grade 3 order card, Return to Afterlife, which has the effect, play this if you have a Vanguard with Shojodoji in its card name, you and your opponent each chooses one of their own rearguard circles, bind all of the cards on the chosen rearguard circles, and at the end of the turn, each player put the cards bound by this effect into their hand. If you and your opponent each bound a card with this effect, put this card into your soul. On the surface, this doesn't sound all too great, because it doesn't do anything actually. It just puts 2 cards in the bind zone, and then at the turn it goes back into your hand. And then potentially this goes into soul. Most likely it will go into soul because that's where it's most useful, thus making not necessarily a hard minus for almost doing nothing. But the reason why it's actually very useful is because of the way that this can be abused. Now, of course, this can be used to remove more cards in the field, so potentially defensive interceptors, guard options, anything of the sorts. This is another way to remove more cards off the field. But more importantly, we just saw another card, a grade 1, which specifically says when placed from hand. This is a way to get that card back into the hand so we can use it next turn again. So it's a versatile card that can be applied for multiple scenarios, and potentially we can use this with other powerful unplaced effects within Dragon Empire that then can be used again and again and again thanks to this order card. It really depends on how you're gonna play. Sadly, it's very restricted to Shojodoji specifically, but who knows? It's a Murukuma / Nubatama ride line, and it's all about bouncing, binding, and whatnot, and all these shenanigans. So I can see like the ride line going into multiple directions with like on place effects, bind zone effects. So discard effects, so a lot of potential options here. And as seen as it's just the initial wave support for the ride line, there is a lot of options. Essentially, the sky's the limit with this ride line. And overall, I'm very excited about this. In first glance, it doesn't look too insane or too flashy. It's very to the basics. This is what it does. It binds stuff, it sets it up, and it gives you multi-tech options. But once you take a look at the more finer detail, you actually see there is a lot of different approaches they can take to ride line with future support, which I am all excited about, and I cannot wait to see the potential final support within this set, and potentially what set 9 and onwards might have to offer for this ride line. But with that said, that's basically everything I want to talk about today. Let me know all your thoughts in the comment section down below, and let me know what you think about this ride line. As always, this video has been brought to you by our lovely patrons over at patreon.com/VanguardInsider. You guys are amazing. If you want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a patron today. But with that said, I've been Mr. Time Leap, and I'll see you guys in the next one!